Amazon on pace for the worst day of the year. Dan Ives joins us here at Post 9, Wedbush securities analyst, to break down some of those numbers. Let's, I guess, begin with Apple. You seem relatively, like the phrase that's been tossed around is good enough for now. Make sense?
I'd say that was about as bullish as you could have gotten from Cupertino and Cook going into an iPhone 16 cycle, which hasn't even begun. Not just in terms of the guidance. China, I think, this is their last negative quarter from year over year. That starts to be a tailwind. Look at services, that remains rock solid. To me, it's on a scale of 1 to 10, call it a 9-8 relative. And that's why I think this is a stock that powers through the headwinds we're seeing. And it's hard to be bearish on Apple going into what I view as an AI-driven super cycle for iPhone 16.
Will there be a debate about that strength versus the macro consumer worries we just spent 10 minutes talking about?
Yeah, look, that will be the debate. But, I mean, I'll be in Asia again this week, and everything we've seen is 80 million units is what we started for iPhone 16. Now it's up to 90. So this is going to be a balancing act, as we've talked about a lot. But in terms of the data, in terms of the quarter, in terms of what you saw from Microsoft, from an Azure perspective, you look at what you saw from Google, you look at what you saw from an AWS perspective for Amazon, the AI revolution story, I believe, is well intact. And all of our checks, this is not a time to panic, despite the white knuckles that we're seeing in the market.
The FT is reporting that Elliott Management told investors recently that NVIDIA is in a bubble and the AI technology is overhyped and that the reality is not matching the hype. You totally disagree, I know.
I couldn't disagree more relative. If we were here before earnings, before conference calls, and I think we even talked about it, let's see what numbers look like. Look at the Azure acceleration. Look at what Lisa Su talked about from AMD. We saw what we
thought Azure was disappointing
in terms of the acceleration that they're guiding for second half. That's really talks about the monetization, that moment is right here. And my view is, look, the haters have continued to hate. The bears have been there for the last few years. I get right now it's easy to come out and kind of yell fire into a crowded theater in tech. We don't see it because it's not just from the calls.
You see the value matching the hype.
I actually think the street is underestimating what is going to be $1 trillion of AI CapEx over the next 3 to 4 years in terms of across tech. And nothing that we saw here in any way dents the thesis.
No, you're right, Dan. And listen, none of them are backing off their CapEx plans. To your point, I mean, AWS, actually acceleration at AWS in terms of revenue growth, up 19%. There is still, though, this larger question as to whether you're going to ultimately get that return on investment over time. You obviously believe that will be the case. But what do you see on the ground in terms of applications that are coming in the near term that will start to at least alleviate any of those fears some investors may have?
Sure. From the enterprise perspective, and we'll hear it from Godfather of AI, Jensen NVIDIA, in a few weeks, the use cases and the amount of enterprise right now that are on that AI path is up 4 or 5x. So these enterprises are on the path from what I believe are going to be use cases across healthcare, financials, insurance, retail. As we've always talked about, it all comes down to show the monetization. The spending's there. And I think when you look at what Sue talked about, Nadella, what we talked about from Sundar, Jassy, this revolution is happening. The monetization phase is now just starting. I'm not going to see that we're going to have air pocket between the CapEx and when revenue comes, but to bet on this and to bet against it, to me, like to bet against Cook and 2.2 trillion in terms of where we ultimately see, the actual install base, and you look at actually right now an AI revolution coming to Apple, that's a tough bet.
Would you give it a year? If it doesn't happen in a year, right, if the rhetoric doesn't change, then would you start to get nervous?
I'd say if we sit here in January, February, and we haven't seen it. We haven't seen the monetization from a software perspective. We haven't seen it from an actual monetization outside just Mag 7 to call it second, third, fourth derivative. If McDermott comes and all of a sudden he's negative on AI, then that's where, of course, we have to take sort of look at it. But right now, it's actually more emboldened because of what we see, not just from earnings, but from our checks.
I've never seen Bill McDermott negative on anything.
Well, he has pivoted before. Yeah.
And it comes if McDermott, Sue, Nadella, Cook are seeing something, I'll take them despite many that are right now kind of throwing gasoline on the fire.